Hi, welcome to Dan and Saran, Take on Hollywood. Today we have Addison Randall sitting in for Saran Fox, and we have our guest, Michael Gonzales. And today what we're going to discuss is the wonderful world of exploitation movies. And one of the reasons we're going to do that is that Addison Randall was one of the great makers of a lot of exploitation films. And I happen to work on a couple of exploitation films myself, and Michael likes exploitation films. So hopefully we'll have a lot of fun today. Let's start with you, Addison. Can you tell us a little bit about what life was like working for PM Entertainment and how you came up with a lot of the movies that you made?
Well, working at PM was like working at a film factory. Basically, we had to do, or we were always trying to do, about 12 films a year, and it would come up. The executive producers would come up with a poster, a title, something like that, and they'd give us a call and they'd say, "Okay, we've got a great poster, and we got to take a meeting." So I'd walk in with the rest of the production crew. It was very much like a studio, so that we were all basically on checks. We were getting checks at the end of the week regardless. But the idea was that we would they'd come in and go, "That's the poster, what do you think?" "Oh, great poster, good artwork, everything like that. Good, we need a movie for it."
So what were some of the, okay, now that you have the poster, how did you actually come up with a story based on the poster?
Well, usually, strangely enough, it would not have a title on it. It would just be this great artwork, explosions and half-naked women. And we'd sit around and go, "Okay, who's got a title?" And we'd start throwing titles out. Sometimes we'd reach into a hat and pull out a verb and an adjective and say, "Did they fit? Yeah, that fits." One of them that I did was called Deadly Breed. And that one was a backwards. That one I came up with the title. They loved the title. The next thing I knew, we were having a meeting looking at 3 different posters. So we had 3 different posters sitting there, and that one actually I had to hand off because I ended up doing the main heavy. So it was like, usually I was sitting in the chair, but this time, nope, you're not sitting in the chair. He's going to direct, and So you never knew what it was going to be, and it was always challenging.
What was the average budget of a movie that you were making?
Average, the first one I did, I think had the first one I did for them, for those 2 guys, was actually a horror film that I started. And that had a budget of, I think, $75,000. We shot it in 5 days.
What was the name of that horror film?
Hollowgate.
Hollowgate.
Hollowgate, yes. It was very funny because the guy that wrote it was one of the producer-directors at GTE, and at the time I was working at GTE as a video guy. And I did this film for him, and they hired me as a director off of that film. And
So what are the requirements to make one of these low-budget films for a company when you're having to churn out so many like that?
Requirements, you have to be fast, literally fast. I mean, very fast. We would walk in on a set. I have done, and there are going to be people out there that aren't going to believe this, but I did it, 18 pages in a day. Wow. The day almost went into double overtime, but we just made it. We were at the, we actually, I will take credit for being one of the first people to use a moving camera during the scene because we were in such a situation. We were coming up on the 12th hour, and I told my DP, I said, "My God," I said, "we haven't got time." He said, "Block the scene and show it to me." So we blocked the scene out, and he looked at it, and he goes, "Run it one more time." I said, "Fine." He put a camera on his shoulder, and he started off on a 2-shot. He moved in on a single, walked around, got the over the shoulder, walked back around here, got the other over the shoulder, pulled back for the wide scene. The scene was overcut. We went home. And it looks beautiful.
So that was in one day, 18 in one day.
18 pages. Not setups, pages.
All right, the most ridiculous that I ever worked on was a TV show I worked on called Air America with Lorenzo Lamas and Scott Plank. And we did 2 episodes that had 25-page day shoots. And you never want to do that.
Yeah.
because if nothing else, no matter what happens, it's going to look awful. Because even though we had double cameras going, and even though we had Lorenzo's mom at the time, Arlene Dahl, as a guest star, how are you going to keep this pace up? And the show was a bottle show, meaning that it was having a lot of clips from previous episodes. But even under that, it was a nightmare. And
This was during the 80s, right?
no, this was
No?
98, 99.
Oh.
And so one of the things that happened was, one of the sad things about production, that when you're shooting an exterior, is there's that thing in the sky called the sun, and it has a really bad habit of going down at a certain point, unless you happen to be in like the Arctic Circle or something. Yeah. And we weren't in the Arctic Circle. So yes, the angles from one side were shot when the sun was out, and the angles from the other side were shot at night. And unlike the time when they did that on The Godfather during the wedding scene, and they had Vittorio Storaro there to shoot it, we didn't have Vittorio Storaro. Our guys were good, but they weren't that good. And so yes, you could tell when you were cutting back and forth, wow, this is a really funny town where one half of the town is daytime and the other half is night.
Well, we had a film that we did called Killing Zone, which I really enjoyed doing. But when we first got all of the reports for it, it was like we were going to shoot it in 35. We had a big budget, which was about $250,000, and everything. We were all just, the guys on the production end of it were just, oh, this is going to be a good shoot. 35, 250,000. We got. I got called into the office, and all of a sudden, in a day, we'd already finished the script. Everything was fine. Took about 2 weeks to do the script, and Joe called me in and he goes, okay, we've lost our funding. So it's now going to be 16 and you have no lights.
Oh.
So all of these night scenes that we had set up for, we had to turn them all into daylight scenes. And it was like, well, how do I get from here to there? Because that scene is nighttime and I can't make it daytime. It won't work. He said, we'll work it out. And they did. And what we did was they took all of the day scenes, basically went into the script and pulled scenes from other films that they had done off the masters and inserted them into the picture.
Oh.
I got to admit, it worked.
So a Frankenstein film.
Yeah,
So they
absolutely.
Frankensteined it, okay.
Absolutely. But it worked. Unless you knew what the scenes were that they had pulled, which I did, because I'd done a few most of them. But yeah, it's like those kind of pictures. I mean, you lose your funding, all of a sudden you're scrambling. You're scrambling.
Speaking of Franken films, in the early days of Roger Corman, he made one of my favorite Franken films of all time. And it was this movie called Track of the Vampire. And one of the most amusing things about this new world of home video is that a lot of these titles that you would have thought had no market will all of a sudden come out in restored editions. And they come out with a great box set called the Bloodbath box set. And it has 4 versions of a movie that were all cut, 4 different movies that were cut from similar footage. It's the Titian painting. Now I'm going to forget the title of the second one. I think it was Portrait in Terror. Then you had Bloodbath, and you had Track of the Vampire. Now, when I was a kid growing up, Track of the Vampire was one of my favorite midnight horror movies because it's basic. I mean, talk about your basic, cheap, low-budget horror films where even the vampire character is played by 2 different actors because the star William Campbell refused to come back because he wasn't being paid properly. So they ended up having another guy play him when he transforms into the vampire. And they actually added the whole vampire element late in the game. Bloodbath is considered to be the version, the most correct. It's the third of them. And it's only 60 minutes. So when they sold it to television, they had to add an additional 20 minutes to it so it could fill out an hour-and-a-half time slot. So they redubbed footage from the Titian movie with Patrick Macnee in it, and tried to kind of sort of make it fit in this film. And then they shot another whole 8-minute montage of this girl being chased by the vampire into the ocean and then being killed by him. This thing lasts like 8 minutes all by itself. And it's ridiculous. You're thinking, this woman must be a marathon runner or something like that, because she's being chased. And this vampire wearing this dark cloak can do that as well. And it
Maybe they're just, no, keep running, keep running.
It also added this ballet sequence in it that was supposedly the lead actress, who was Laurie Sanders, who was in the TV show Petticoat Junction at the same time, under a different name, thank God for her. And the woman who's doing the ballet doesn't even have the same hairstyle. So it is one of those things that you look at, and there's something almost quasi-romantic about watching something that is so cobbled together out of desperation and yet has this kind of energy to it. So Michael, what's your favorite exploitation movie?
I have a couple. And I have one that was semi-cannibalized, but it only cannibalized itself. My favorite, like, of all time is still Phantasm. I think I've told you that. Love Phantasm. I'm not a fan of the sequels or the newest one that they tried to do. It was like 2 years ago. That was terrible. But Phantasm for sure. That didn't cannibalize itself because the original film is just a hot mess for the first about 20, 30 minutes, and then it really gets good after that. But it's awesome. The one that does sort of cannibalize itself, that is technically exploitation film that I love, Evil Dead, the second one.
Yeah, Evil Dead's terrific.
Yeah, it took some footage from the first one, from the original one, but it still works, and it's still really, really fantastical and amazing. And Critters. I like Critters a lot.
Yeah,
Critters is fun.
Critters is awesome.
It's funny. I mean, Critters and the ones you're talking about, those are like, to me, those are big budget pictures. And but there's a company that, PM, they became the kings of the home video. They really did. But there was a company it's still around. They're not doing anything right now, not doing a whole hell of a lot. But there's a guy by the name of Sam Sherman, he became a very good friend of my dad's, and was the only guy that ever put my dad back in front of a camera before. Independent International Pictures. I tell you how, they were just amazing, because the things that they would do, the films were just, they were so bad they were funny. And for instance, they had this one guy that had a ray gun, and he was going to shoot people with a ray gun. And they wanted to put the ray gun effect in. So Sam took the footage and he scratched the ray gun off the emulsion. So that when you see it, it's just this line that comes out. He went frame by frame and scratched the emulsion off the film. Wow. And I mean, it's so obvious. Yeah. I mean, but because they couldn't afford the effect, and they needed this effect. So Sam is in here.
Was somebody off screen going pew 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 pew?
I'm not sure, no? but that was the kind of stuff they used to do, and they would shoot these things for, like, outrageously low money, 10 grand maybe, and but they put out a whole series of really bad low budget films. But they were the kings of the drive-in. They did things like, Blood of the Vampire sounds like one of their titles. It probably isn't, but they would...
Actually, Blood of the Vampire is a Paul Naschy movie. It's another one where you brought in a foreign import and dubbed it.
And they were famous for that. Independent was famous for doing that. They would come in, they'd bring in these old movies, and that nobody was watching anyway, and chop them up. They were the kings of the Frankenfilm. Literally. They would put, 3 scenes from this film, 4 scenes from that film, 2 scenes from this film, mix them all up. 1 or 2 days of shooting of a star that was usually on his deathbed, Bela Lugosi, people like that, and this incredible Bela Lugosi in Blood of the Vampire. And you'd see Bela Lugosi maybe 15 seconds because he died the next day, so they had to bring, like Plan 9 from Outer Space, which what they did. And what do you say? You know, it's like, God, this is terrible.
Why I like talking about these is because when people try to break into the film industry, this is such a lucrative way to do it. And what's fascinating is when you see how many big names started out doing exactly this kind of film.
Corman, the thing about Corman was he ended up, he couldn't afford the people he found.
Well, he used to tell them that. He said, if you're working for me in 5 years, you've done something wrong. And look at who he started.
Oh,
He
my
started
Lord.
Scorsese and Coppola and all that. I mean, when you see something like Dementia 13, which was Coppola's first non-porn movie, and you're watching it and you're seeing this stylistic that you see would later come into his other films. And that whole idea of the guy having a heart attack at the beginning and his radio falling in the water and you falling down, that was really innovative and cheap. And that's the training that people got from working on these. I mean, Jonathan Demme, who would go on to do Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia, the first of his movies that I saw was a thing called Crazy Mama with Cloris Leachman. And you're watching this thing and you're actually seeing him try out the ideas that he would later put into fruition in his later films. And it was the greatest training ground for these younger filmmakers.
Well, it goes all the way back to the studios. I mean, my dad made a pretty good name for himself doing the Three Musketeers series, but they would shoot those in a week. They would shoot them in 5 to 7 days. In that money, they would shoot them like $5,000-6,000 in that money those days. Today, that would probably be what? $500,000? I don't know.
No, it'd be about probably about 70,000.
Well, still, and they'd shoot them in, and same thing. I mean, but those films for the studios, that's what held the studios up while they were making their tent poles. While they're making the big films, all the money coming in from the B films, and the kids sitting there cheering the cowboy on, and the cereals and things like that. That kept the studios alive.
Well, there's this whole theory that what makes art is not freedom, it's limitations. And the biggest limitation of all is when you have no money. And you have to kind of, you have to kind of MacGyver it and figure out how you can make or how you can finish your film in spite of that greatest of all limitations.
Well, the fun thing about it now is, anybody that wants to make a film, if they're serious about it, they can do it. I mean, it doesn't matter. I wonder what my grandfather would have done had he had the stuff that he has today. But you can take your phone, take your friends, go out, shoot your movie, bring it back home, put it in your computer, cut it, and at this point you can deliver it. You can just
Actually, you know
distribute
what?
it.
For those who haven't seen you here before, who were your father and grandfather?
Well, my grandfather was Hal Roach. Couple of things that he did that some people know. Laurel and Hardy and the Our Gang series, which he later sold to MGM, and they re-released it as
Little Rascals.
Little Rascals, that's it. And my dad was Bob Livingston, who was the romantic lead, shall we say, of a serial series called The Three Musketeers, which he had to leave at a certain point, and they brought in this complete unknown guy that the audiences really didn't like. They wanted my dad back into it, but his name was John Wayne, and
A little unknown actor.
Yeah.
People
Tiny
forget
actor.
that John Wayne started in those programmer westerns.
He was a Republic. He was under contract at Republic, and Republic was the king of the B movies. There were the big five, and then there was Republic, and Republic was the king of the action film. They were the first ones ever to use a camera car.
And if I'm not mistaken on this, and this is going to be embarrassing, but I seem to remember they used to take those old Three Musketeers thing, cut them up, and show them on Romper Room. So like
Probably,
when I was in
probably.
like first grade, I remember
Yeah.
seeing those Three Musketeers.
I know they were on television for a long time.
That and the Cisco Kid.
Yes, who was my he was my Uncle Duncan.
Oh,
Duncan Ronaldo, yeah, he's a very good friend of my dad's. First time I ever got thrown off a film set was when we'd gone down to I guess it was Culver. I think it was Culver City Studios, and they were shooting a Cisco kid, and they were in a break, and we went in. They started shooting, and I had a cold, and I had this cough, and I coughed once. Keep it quiet, keep it quiet. About the third time, they said, "Would you get that kid off the set?" So we had to leave because I had a cold. But yeah, he was my Uncle Duncan.
In the early 90s, when I first got into the industry, and I was working for a Japanese company, actually this late 80s, and one of the things that was interesting is they were doing all of these, what they were calling erotic thrillers, which are kind of a little bit harder R movies, where they would get actors like William Catt escaping from Last American Hero and wondering what the hell went wrong with his life. And when you saw these movies, they were done by this Indian guy by the name of Jagmundra. And removing the silly, phony sex stuff from it, you had these really great thrillers that I wish, and I hate remakes, but I almost wish you could remake them because the stories themselves are terrific. My favorite of these is one called Criminal Intent, and it had Jake Scalia and Robert Davi and Joan Severance, and it had the most outrageous story. It's about a cop who thinks he accidentally kills his wife's alcoholic bartending brother, and so he feels really guilty about that. And then in the middle of the movie, a la Psycho, he ends up shot in another car chase, and it turns out that Joan Severance has done it to him. It's not a spoiler; this thing's not even available. But it was
Trigger warning, Dan.
It was a really a good film, and I remember seeing it and going, "Geez, I wish that this was something that could have had a proper production." And then you look at something like Basic Instinct, which was that exact movie done for $100 million.
Well, there you go.
And we know how that turned out.
Oh yeah. I mean, I still actually prefer Criminal Intent, if you want my honest opinion.
I haven't seen it, so I'd have to watch it to compare. But and I think we've talked about this. What was your favorite ending on the Basic Instinct? Which cut did you prefer?
Basic Instinct doesn't have.
I
think you're thinking of Fatal
Oh,
Attraction.
I'm thinking Fatal Attraction.
Okay,
I'm
well,
sorry,
Fatal
you're right.
Attraction was that's another one that should have, for all intents and purposes, been a TV movie that had that would probably at that time have had Morgan Fairchild or someone like that in it. And when you see Fatal Attraction, and probably Andrew Stevens playing the Michael Douglas role, when you see Fatal Attraction, it had, as the ending that we know in the U.S., an almost rip-off of Halloween, which is very exploitative, in which everyone involved with it felt was a complete travesty of the original intent, because the original intent of Fatal Attraction was to be an AIDS allegory, that you have one unprotected or uncautious moment and you end up dead from it. And somehow now the moral of the movie is, if you want to really save your marriage, the way you do it is have an affair with a psychopath and have her boil your rabbit. And yet the movie made hundreds of millions of dollars, and it allowed Adrian Lyne to take that next step up as a director to where he got Final Cut and he became God, which he then totally threw away by deciding he had to do a remake of Lolita that was far more explicit than the Kubrick version, and he refused to sell it to another company. So by the time it was done, and you had McMartin case and a bunch of other scandals coming out about pedophilia and all that, couldn't release it properly. So, oh well, there went his career up in smoke. So the other ending, the original ending of it, was that the Glenn Close character commits suicide, almost 30 years old, so not a spoiler anymore.
Trigger warning.
So when she commits suicide in a way that makes it look like he had assaulted her and killed her. And so at the end of it, you see him being dragged off to the big house. And that's the version that was released in Europe to being a huge hit, and Japan to being a huge hit, while the U.S. had the other version. And of course, now on DVD you can watch both.
The happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
So, but exploitation, it's funny because if you look at the A movies that are made today, those 30 years ago would have been the exploitation pictures. Our A movies are now what used to be the exploitation pictures.
Well, there was a long time, the way they were sold was just amazing to me. Naturally, because I was the director, I had to go to the American film market. I never got to go to the Italian one. I never got to go to Cannes.
MIFID.
Yeah, MIFID, thank you. And then, of course, there was Cannes, and the partners were the only ones that got to go to those because they didn't want to pay for the extra tickets.
Oh, well, look at how expensive it was. You'd have to stay at the Hotel
yeah.
du Cap.
Oh.
You'd have to deliver this was in the days before, of course, being able to do stuff on the web. So you had to go and pay for those hotels in cash. It was $8,000 a night. And can you imagine having to cart that money into the country?
Oh, yeah, on top of that, for AFM, the thing that was always fun for me, we'd go into our suite. We always had a suite. We had the posters up. Half the posters usually didn't have films behind them. They were just posters that we'd had made up to make it look good, and we were going to make the films later. But what the buyers would do would be they would come in and they would sit down, especially the Middle Eastern buyers, and they'd put the tape in, and they'd take the thing and fast forward through everything until they either got to a sex scene or they got to a gunfight or an explosion.
Yep.
They would literally fast forward. You'd see them watch your movie, and here you are as a director. You're kind of proud of it. I mean, yeah, I never had the idea that I was an movie maker, so they go, oh, that, and it was fast forward film selling, and that's why we were told whenever we did one of these things, it had to be shot in L.A. at the very least, usually Hollywood, because they wanted to see the Star Walk. There had to be at least one set of boobs in it, empty set of boobs in it, and we had to kill people off.
Not one boob, a set of boobs.
Yes, it had to be a complete set. And we had to kill off people in new and interesting ways. That was what Joe Merhi would always say. But it has to be new and interesting. See, he'd look at the script, and if it wasn't new and interesting, no, new and interesting. How many ways can you kill somebody? So what we started doing is making it more to the point where when I did Deadly Breed, I was the main heavy in it, as I said, my ending became new and interesting because the effects guy and I got together. I said, we're going to make this really good. He lit me up with 17 different squibs.
That must have hurt.
Yeah, especially the one that was down here went off under my armpit, and and everybody goes, oh man, you died really good. And I said, yes, because I was hurting like a thank you very much. And so when they cut after that, these squibs going off, and they called cut, I just laid there. And Joe was are you all right? Because Joe was directing. Are you all right? Are you all right? Are you all right? And I finally came to, because he was getting scared. I came to, and I said, yeah. I said, but my armpit's killing me. And the effects guy went crazy. He was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But I mean, we used to do stuff that was just, I walked out after Deadly. I had this explosion. We were doing the big ending, and this explosion's going off all over the place. I walk out. This one fireball comes out and passes my ear like this, and goes out in front of me. And I'm trying to be, really cool here. So God, it cut, and I went, oh, thank God. Big fireball comes around my head.
So that's the wonderful, wonderful world of low-budget and exploitative films. Anyway, thank you very much, Addison. Thank you very much, Michael.
Of course, you're welcome.
And stay tuned. Please like and subscribe to our channel.
Please.
And we will see you on our next episode of Dan and Saran's Take on Hollywood.